On September 6th, 2021, I visited Hesstons for the first time in a couple years as part of the 2021 Steam and Power Show. There was a lot of trains running because it was the Steam and Power Show. I would visit Hesstons 2 more times the next year, in May and then again in July. But I was disappointed with the lack of trains because I was expecting to see the amount of them that I had seen during the Steam and Power Show, which is a lot more because that's their big moneymaker weekend. So I went to the 2022 Steam and Power Show, and that was a great success. I tried to go to Hesstons again during the summer of 2023, but got kicked out by a tornado. So I went again on September 4th, 2023. Now, the previous year, coincidentally also on September 4th, it poured relentlessly at the Steam and Power Show. I was excited for this trip because it wasn't going to be pouring. Don't worry though, it didn't go well. It was only 95 degrees outside with extremely potent humidity. Once we got out of the car and headed into the ticket booth, we met up with our cousins and aunt, and then after that, we looked out to where the trains were, and oh my god, that's the Shay! But before we got the chance to look at that, we headed to the vendors. One of them had this Rock Island sign. There's also these Lionel engines in a box. Assortment of Thomas the Tank Engine merchandise. An assortment of HO scale cabooses and rolling stock. And a South Shore 75th anniversary poster. Then, though, I heard the sound of the Shay departing, and you know me, I rushed over there as fast as possible to catch it. Something I noticed about this train was that it wasn't using the typical consist of ex-Brookfield Zoo coaches. It had one big green wooden coach and then 4 silver open coaches, none of which had markings for any railroad companies on them. Heading over to the other set of vendors, we see this box of train patches, an EMD FT next to a Union Pacific Centennial and SD60M, and Ertl, Daisy, and Mavis, which my brother bought at the vendors. Then I rushed over as I heard the sound of the Kittyland Limited, but before it departed, I caught the Norfolk Southern 8102 Pennsylvania Railroad Heritage Unit replica in 7-inch gauge. Poking through the trees, we see the steam tractor, the Minneapolis. We decided to go to the rest of the vendors later and ride the large train with the Shay. But as we were walking to the station, we caught up for another shot of the Minneapolis. But before the Shay could show itself, the Kittyland Limited pulled out of the station. Thankfully, it stopped blasting steam right before it hit me. Hey, look, it's my favorite engine at Hesstons, Set Inquiry Central number 1. Due to the Steam and Power Show, they were running both of the miniature gauge trains, and I was able to catch number 1 pulling into the station. Number 1 is pulling the same consist it had last year, made up of a cattle car, a coach Kessington, a New York Central gondola, another coach, Dune Acres, and a Set Inquiry Central Railroad caboose. Then, through the smoke and fog, the Shay, with our ride, whipped around the bend and headed into the station. Once we got on the train, we saw a replica of D and RGW 361 in 7-inch gauge, as well as number 1. It had departed and headed around the bend in front of the Shay. Hear that horn? Yeah, that's the Norfolk Southern Wabash 1070 Heritage Unit sounding its horn. It was ready to depart. With a roar, both the Wabash Heritage Unit and the Shay departed the station at the same time.
For your safety, please remain seated with your hands on feet left. Don't go near cameras inside the train at all times, and no smoking, please. Thank you.
We passed by this small diesel switcher and realized that we were technically in a race with the Wabash Heritage Unit. Unfortunately, it had a lead, but the Shay started to catch up as they headed up the gradient. As the Wabash couldn't make it up the gradient as well because it was smaller, and the Shay was a geared locomotive, which meant that it had absurd power up hills, which it would demonstrate later. Anyways, because of its increased speed, the Shay passed by the Wabash Heritage Unit, allowing me to get this footage. Despite the fact they were losing, the engineer of the Wabash unit was a good sport and gave us a horn salute as we passed far away from the Wabash unit. The Shay climbed up Glacier Pass, one of the steepest gradients on the line, with absolutely no problems. As we were going down this section, though, we realized that these coaches were absurdly bumpy and nowhere near as comfortable as the normal ones. The Shay once more exited the forest and headed into the grass cutting that almost goes into Michigan. It's called the Michigan Line cutting. As you can see, the area that was actually cut has gotten significantly smaller since last time. I guess that's because of all the wood that's over in the area which hasn't been cut. As we headed into the thick of the forest, we saw 361 and its train. Soon enough, we passed by Shady Rest. At this point, the train would normally start accelerating to push itself up this hill, which is the steepest on the line. Except, when I say normally, I mean when number 2 is pulling the train, because, you know, it normally pulls the train. But this is the Shay. Remember, it's a geared engine. It didn't have to speed up. It climbed up the 7% grade with no problems whatsoever.
We are now passing the Indiana-Michigan state line as we speak to the left of the train.
We're gonna be leaving Michigan soon. Yeah. We're looking at a high run. Mobile trains can only go like 2% of this.
Exactly.
Yo, look at railroad.
Folks, we have made it to the top of Michigan curve.
Soon enough, the train met up with the miniature gauge tracks again and passed by the Elaine Bridge. And we saw Norfolk Southern 8102, the PRR Heritage Unit, once again with its train as it headed under the Elaine Bridge. After cresting the hill, the Shay bumped its way along towards the 7-inch gauge locomotive facility.
And also to note, the passenger cars in the lane of this one are from the Cedar Point Railroad in Sandusky, Ohio.
The only locomotive that was outside of the shop was Rio Grande Southern number 20, a 460 10-wheeler, with a Rio Grande boxcar couple behind it. Then we pass by the back/narrow gauge locomotive facility, where we see the shell of a coach, a barrel full of locomotive parts, a couple more locomotive parts on the ground, a giant saw blade that's there for seemingly no reason, this steam crane, as well as the actual facility itself. This facility has a couple things in it that are interesting, like a red and yellow diesel locomotive with the same class as Flying Dutchman Railroad number 15, Brookfield, Salt Creek, and Western, as well as Heston and Galena Creek, ex-Brookfield Zoo coaches, and a couple flatbeds. Spectacularly, to finish off the journey, the Shay rounded the bend near the lake in the incredibly scenic section of the route with an epic whistle blast. We caught a brief glimpse of the Kittyland Limited as the train pulled into the station, past an East Broadtop ? Hopper, as well as this GB&L gondola. I snapped a picture of number 1 next to the Shay, and then I got another picture of the internal workings of the Shay. Man, that is complicated. Then we decided we were going to ride the miniature gauge trains. I caught 8102 sliding into position and ready to board passengers. Oh, and the entire area was filled with these poisonous caterpillars. Like, there were a lot of them. I also caught a picture of this Rio Grande caboose at the end of 8102's train, and this strange Union Pacific maintenance of way car at the end of our train. We would be riding 361 in its train of gondolas. Then I caught the Kittyland Limited in the distance, moving into the station to pick up a fresh load of passengers. We climbed aboard 361 in its train, but once we were on board, 8102 departed. The engine was too far away to catch, so I only got a shot of the caboose leaving. Then, with a jolt, 361 and its train of gondolas pulled out of the station. This train ride was gonna be fun. We passed by the Shay as we departed the station. The train slowed down as it struggled its way up the gradient past a couple whistle signs and such. The last time we visited Hesstons and rode on this train, which was back in May of 2022, there was flowers and plants in this area that hadn't been cut. We soon enough passed by this tree. Yes, it's supposed to have a face, one of the eyes is missing. Too bad for it. Then we passed by this bog. Then we headed over this bridge over that said bog. We passed over another bridge. This bridge is called Bill Went. I'm assuming that's somebody that the bridge was named after. And it crosses over Hesstons Gulch, which is a small creek. The train then headed uphill for a bit, and then it battled its way up this gradient and headed towards the Elaine Bridge. I got a shot of the actual Elaine name on the side of the bridge. As you can see, there it is. That's why I call this the Elaine Bridge. Then we headed underneath this bridge/house shelter thingamabob. We get a nice view of the locomotive as it rounds the bend into the curve. The train accelerated quite a bit as it heads down this hill. We get another nice view of the engine. And then it passes by this tiny house. Not sure what it's for, but it's there. The train slowed down considerably as it made the figure 8 and crossed over the Elaine Bridge. And then it passed by that one whistle sign that's just a concrete pillar and not a keystone like the rest of them. As the steam train exits the forest, we see its diesel counterpart, powered by the Wabash Heritage Unit. Then we see Rio Grande Southern number 20 again, this time up close, as well as its DNRGW boxcar. Then we see number 2 being steamed up in the yard. Using that car for comparison, you can see how much smaller it is than a standard steam engine. You can also see the Tom Thumb replica in the background. You can hear number 2's safety valve going crazy as 361 passes by this 7-inch gauge coaling tower. And then 361 rounds the bend underneath this gantry signal to complete the lap. I've gotta say, this ride was really fun. It was so cool being on a tiny train again, and one pulled by a steam engine at that. The train finally pulled around the bend and into the depot. It slowed down quite slowly and stopped plenty of times on the hill because it had to wait for another train waiting on track 1 to depart. When we got off, I walked up towards the locomotive to ask the engineer if he ran out of steam on the hill. He said no. Then I thanked him for the epic ride and moved on to other things. I walked to the middle station where I got this picture of number 1 again, but I wouldn't stay there for long because I headed to the back locomotive facility. We see number 2 again, decked out with Guatemala flags on its front. We also see Tom Thumb replica and 3-foot gauge. I actually saw this engine at the previous Steam and Power show in 2022. Inside the actual sheds, we see Flying Dutchman Railroad number 15, and this. I don't even know what it is because it doesn't even have a name. We also see number 2's sister engine. Yeah, it's dead. This is Old Granny, number 1 from the Brookfield Zoo, where a lot of Heston stuff comes from. And then we see that engine again. It's a Czechoslovakian 040. You can see the builder's plate here. It's number 1930 and it was built in 1940. Heading back to the main station, we see the Shay rounding the bend passed by the Kittyland Limited. It was announced over the intercom that this would be the Shay's last departure, so I decided to stay to catch it. But before the Shay could depart, number 1 and its train left the station. Then, 361 and its train, which we rode on earlier, departed the station and passed by me. The engineer, who I talked to earlier, even gave me a blast of the whistle as he passed by. While I was filming 361, the Kittyland Limited had pulled into the station. But once I started filming, thinking it was going to leave, one of the engineers of the Shay climbed out, up onto the locomotive, walked along its footplate, adjusted a cog, and then walked down, back off the footplate and back into the cab. Yeah, this guy was completely sooty. I mean, so was I at this point. Finally, the Kittyland Limited was given permission to depart and left the station once again. With 2 mighty blasts of its whistle, Oregon Lumber Company Shay number 7 grandly departed the station, and in doing so absolutely destroyed my eardrums. Then number 1 returned, and I was able to catch it pulling into the station. Then I headed back over to the locomotive facility to catch number 2. The Shay would need to go back into the sheds to cool off for a while, so number 2 left the yards and headed onto the main line to relieve the Shay of its duties. Then I caught the Pennsy Heritage Unit departing. I headed back to the tracks to catch the Wabash Heritage Unit following the Pennsy one. Then, number 1 departed. I headed back into the station to catch the Kittyland Limited, which was coming into the station to replace number 1 and get a fresh load of passengers. Oh, and it's about to slip. Here we see a 1908 Skinner Electric Company power plant. And then this vintage tractor. It's being used to wet the paths around Hesstons. After that, we had to look at some more tractors. First, the Minneapolis, and then this one. Clearly, it was built by Reeves & Co. of Columbus, Indiana, as that says it on the front. Here's Russell, built in 1917. This clearly vintage gas-powered tractor with a weird backward seat for some reason. This steam tractor, which is pretty destroyed, it looks like. Now we head into the shops, where we see what looks like a model or mini version of a steam tractor. This larger one, numbered 395. Another one, it says Case on the front, and it's got a nice bold eagle there too. We also see a narrow gauge steam engine named Sir There's No Way I'm Pronouncing That in a case. And this machine. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to produce popcorn, but it didn't have any corn in at the time I was filming it. Then, the Minneapolis sprung back to life and headed past me. While heading back to the station, I snapped a quick picture of this Whitcomb bow switcher. And once I was in the station, I caught number 1 pulling in. After that, we briefly headed back to the vendors where I took a picture of these John Deere tractors lined up, and then headed into the actual vendors where I bought these 2 sick bridges, and my brother bought this 2002 Take and Play Herald. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video on our trip to Hesstons. Make sure to come back next time for another documentary just like this one.